Okay, everyone, welcome. It is a big honor and privilege. This is a course I've been waiting for so long, and I'm so excited it's finally here. And that is the world of Kabbalah. Before we begin the world of Kabbalah, I want to plug a women's event, a women's club starting in just less than 2 weeks. The Rosh Chodesh Society is coming to Woodbury. Now, Rosh Chodesh is the name for the first day of the Jewish month. It's called Rosh Chodesh, the new moon. That's what Rosh Chodesh means, and it's a special women's holiday, and it's a holiday it's a mini holiday, but women have a special attachment to it, and so once a month, and it's going to be on Mondays from now for the next 7 months. Jewish women are getting together. It's a social and learning club, and that begins Monday, November 13th, as we begin the new month of Kislev, and we'll meet every month afterwards. There's a very positive response already. Many people are signing up, and it's part learning, part calibrating, part what ladies do. Men are not invited, but men can eat the challah that the women make. Okay, so that's just a plug. That's you can learn more on our website or sign up to our email list to learn more about that. Okay, now there's something important we have to do when we start this class, and that is we have to use this opportunity to do something for Israel. Because when you study Torah, it gives us tremendous strength, but we want to use all three pillars. There's three pillars of strength, and that is when we study, and when we pray, and when we do a mitzvah in action, we do good deeds. So I'm going to pass around the charity box, and we'll do some tzedakah. We're going to say a prayer, Psalm 122, and then we're going to study. And the rest of the class is going to be dedicated to the captives, the return of all the hostages, to the safety of the soldiers that are putting their life on the line to protect the Jewish people, and for all the Jewish people in the Holy Land and throughout the entirety of the world. We really pray that everyone should be safe and strengthened. So there's a jar with coins in it. Here's the coins. And then the charity. Let's see. Okay. Now let us say together Psalm 122. Let me actually load it into the chat box as well. Let me attach the file here. I'm attaching a file so you can find, so you can follow along on your computer. So open the file. It'll be Psalm 122. Okay, I'll just wait a minute so everyone can open up the file. Let us read together. I'm going to read in the Hebrew, but there's a translation as well on the page, as well as a transliteration. Shir Hamalot LeDavid Samachti Ba'omrim Li Beit Adonai Nelech Omdot Hayur Ragleinu B'Sha'arayich Yerushalayim Yerushalayim Habenuya Ki Ir Shechubar LaYachta Shesham Alu Shvatim Shifteya Edus LiYisrael La'odot L'Shem Adonai Ki Shama Yashvu Chizot LeMishpat Chisos Leveit David Shalu Shalom Yerushalayim Yishalo Avayach Yehi Shalom B'Chelech Shalva Bar Menasayach Leman Achai V'Rei Adavar Na Shalom Bach Leman Beit Adonai Eloheinu Avak Shetov Lach. Let me just read the concluding translation of the concluding verses. For the sake of my kin and friends, let me speak of peace in your midst. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will request your good. Okay, so this is a prayer of serenity and peace for the people of Israel and around the world. So let us dive into this course on Kabbalah. Let's lighten the mood a little bit. You know, they say, why did the mystic invest in startups? Because he wanted to become a venture capitalist. And he wanted to turn private equity into profits, the other type of profits. You know, there was once there was once a Kabbalist who owned a hot dog stand in New York City, and a man approached and said, "Make me one with everything." And then he handed the person a $20 bill, and the Kabbalist didn't provide any change. He said, "Where's my change?" He said, "Change must come from within." Right? There was a rabbi fresh out of rabbinical seminary, and he felt, so empowered. He said, I need to practice real life practice. So the school hooked him up with a new cemetery. There's a just starting cemetery, and they made an arrangement. You know what? There's someone that's going to be buried there and has no family relatives. You'll lead the funeral. So the rabbi comes, he prepares, he rehearses, he comes to the ceremony, and he gives the most moving, tear-jerking eulogy about the greatness of the man and the holiness of the soul. The construction, he sees the construction men had just newly dug up the ground, and there's nobody there except for the construction men, but he's giving it his heart that all the construction workers, they start to cry. They're so moved. And the rabbi leaves, and one construction worker turns to the other. He said, "Wow, I never realized that rabbis offer such moving words when we're putting in a septic tank." Right? What is Kabbalah? Kabbalah is all about one idea. The Kabbalist hat is the idea that there's always much more beneath the surface. We see with our physical eyes one reality, but beneath the surface, there's much more. Think about a person who is on the top of a mountain overseeing the most beautiful colors in the sky, and he's surrounded in the most beautiful landscape, and the weather is perfect and peaceful. Now you write that in a text describing this image, right? Sometimes to train computer models, you have to describe what's in the image. So one person writes, "The sky is orange, the birds," whatever. You could describe it in a very factual way. But do you really get at the emotion of the picture, of what the person is really experiencing? And sometimes, if you've never experienced it yourself, it's very hard to relate to what's there. And so what Kabbalists try to do is try to open your mind to see the many layers that are beneath and hiding underneath. And that gives us tremendous power, as we'll discover. So today's lesson is the evolution of ego. Where does ego come from? Now, to us, it's pretty obvious. What do you mean? I exist, so I have ego. But to a Kabbalist, this is a very hard thing to grapple with. Before we do that, let's give a little intro to Kabbalah. But first, what comes to mind when you hear the word Kabbalah? If you can think and share, what comes to mind when you hear Kabbalah? To accept, to receive. What are you receiving? Wisdom? Okay. What do you think when you hear Kabbalah? Mysterious. Mystical. Secret.
And Madonna.
Madonna. All right. Okay. So remember I explained that when you're sitting on a mountain, it's very hard. If you've never experienced that feeling, it's very hard to express to someone else what that feeling is. Well, when God gave the Torah, he also revealed himself to the entire Jewish people. And ever since, we've been struggling to put into words what that feeling was. It says you just got to be there. How was it? Tell me about it. You just got to be there to understand what I'm talking about. Well, the Kabbalists throughout the generations tried to put words and language to this Kabbalah, this received tradition, this received wisdom of what the universe is all about, what we are all about, and what God is all about. And so God, we don't see with our eyes. Our souls, we don't see with our eyes. but there were people that knew it. There were people that knew it at Mount Sinai, and now they're trying to pass it on from generation to generation. However, there was one thing they were very careful of in the earlier generations, and that was not to share it to people that weren't well trained and well versed in Torah. Because sometimes when you're describing something and the person cannot relate to it, there's a grave danger that they might distort it and come up with entirely new religion from distorting. And that's why Kabbalah for many years was only taught to a select few. A select few in every generation, those that were masters in the rest of Torah, also received this tradition. And it was passed on in small groups throughout the generations. And this is the same thing with most of the oral tradition. Most of the oral tradition was not allowed to be written down. It was forbidden to be written down until 2,000 years ago. The Romans were crushing the Jews in Israel, and the Jews couldn't get together to study Torah. And so there was a risk that this tradition would be lost. And so the Talmud was written down, the Midrashic teachings were written down, as well as these Kabbalistic teachings began to be put in paper. But they weren't necessarily put in paper as a book that any person can open and understand. They were written as notes for people that already knew the information in just a guide, a memorization to help them follow along. But they already knew the information. So Kabbalah means received information. All this information was already known, but they just needed a guide. And so Rab Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar. Mainly his student wrote down his teachings. And then ever since, every few hundred years, the more detached we've become from those people that knew what the Kabbalah was, you needed more commentaries developing around it to explain what is it that they were referring to. If you might look in a Kabbalistic, so the driving question for this course is, what is Kabbalah and its central teaching, and how can I use these teachings to improve my everyday life? These are the most important things that you should walk away. Someone has to mute themselves. Not sure who. Okay. So we learned already a little bit about what Kabbalah is. Kabbalah means received tradition. It's received tradition. So let's take a look at text 2. Actually, before we do text 2, I actually want to start off with an exercise. So there's an exercise 1.1, but let me find the page that this exercise might be on. Somewhere towards the back of the lesson. Moment. Anyone found the exercise? The other. Not the daily exercise. Okay, page 22 in the student book. Okay, jump to page 22 in the student book. And let us, again, if you have the PDF, you can open up the PDF. It's in the chat box, the PDF of the lesson at page 22. And the exercise here is to pursue the following list and mentally identify one trait that does not pose a challenge for you.
Right.
I think we know. Okay. And then mentally identify one that does.
I know.
I can't find one that doesn't.
Intrusiveness.
Okay. By the end of this class, hopefully we'll have some tools to deal with this issue that you want to work on. That is an amazing gift that we'll have from Kabbalah. So what makes Manishtana Halayla hazeh. What makes this course, Kabbalah course, different than any other Kabbalah course that you've ever taken? And that is this. This is what's unique about this course. Many times, you start off with an issue, a problem. I'm going through a problem, a tool. I want to learn a Kabbalistic concept to solve that issue, to solve that problem. So the starting point starts off with the problems, and then we go look to Kabbalah for the answer. But you never get a chance to really learn Kabbalah on its terms and get a big picture of what Kabbalah is all about. You're hearing all these Kabbalistic concepts, but they're all scattered. You don't see it within a framework. And that's the difference about learning how a car works. Imagine you're driving a car. Do you really have to know how the engine works and how the carburetor and the fuel injectors and all the parts work? No. Most of us don't really need to learn how that works. We could just, when we get in trouble, we open up the troubleshooting manual. Oh, and then we learn specific issue. Oh, this issue, that problem. Okay, we learn how to fix it. Google, TikTok, YouTube, we figure out the problem. So what are the benefits of knowing how the car works? What are the benefits for taking a crash course, Mechanics 101, to learn about the course? No crash course. Not the crash course with the car. But why do we only take a non-crash course with the car? Is for this, there's two reasons. Two benefits of taking a crash course of knowing the car. Number one, in case of emergency. When there's emergency, what are you going to do? You have no reception. You can't look at YouTube. The manual's missing. If you know how the car works, then you could solve it. Most people don't need to know it, so they could get along fine. But in an emergency, those that will know, they have a leg up. And number two, what if you want to upgrade your car? Add some performance, enhancements, different benefits. If you know how the car works, you can do an upgrade. And the same thing is that's what we're going to do in Kabbalah today. I want you to look at the charts, the pictures that they show towards the beginning of the book. Look at these Kabbalah diagrams. This is what you see in some Kabbalistic works. These are specifically from the 1500s. And what you see is they're putting imagery. Have anyone seen such imagery before, Kabbalistic imagery? What is it that they're trying to do? What they're trying to do here is they're trying to give language to spiritual concepts, but in a diagram. And they're giving you, like the blueprints of the car, this is the blueprints of the cosmos, but of the spiritual cosmos. And they're trying to give it physical language. And what we're going to do in this course is we're going to study the entire cosmos, the entire spiritual cosmos, from the bottom all the ways up to the top. So if you have the book, you'll see there's a pullout. There's an insert. That is your Kabbalah map. Okay? There's two sides to it. One side is key terms, and that's just a handy, if you're into this kind of thing, you can look at the different terms we're going to learn throughout this course, and it's divided by lesson, color-coded by lesson. It's a little technical. Some people like the technical, so enjoy. But for the rest of us visual learners, we're going to be going through this map. Okay? And if you look on the left side, there's a spiritual map, and that's what we're going through. On the bottom, the blue part, that's in lesson 1. And we're going to work our way through the map all the way till the top. And by the end of the course, we're going to understand, or we're going to attempt to, everything that the Kabbalists tried to say. So now you get a big picture of the whole of Kabbalah. And all of a sudden, when you'll be taking other Kabbalistic classes or reading other teachings and it mentions a Kabbalistic concept, you'll say, I know where that fits into the big picture. So this course is going to give you the big picture, the world of Kabbalah. And then the power of that is that we can find spiritual solutions for ourselves in our lives, but they won't be random. We'll see where it fits into the big picture. So just like the car, You know how the car works. You can make upgrades because you know exactly how the car works. You also know what to do in a case of emergency. As we've been in exile for longer and longer, we've become in a state of emergency. We're in a spiritual state of emergency. People are in chaos. People are confused. People don't know where to turn. People are seeking answers. So it has become much more important for people to study Kabbalah today, for people to know how the car works. What is it that we're driving? Where are we heading? What are we doing? Where are we going? It's become so much more important because we're in a state of emergency. 2,000 years ago, were Jews in a state of emergency? No, not really. They had we had enemies trying to hurt us, but it wasn't a spiritual emergency. It was a physical emergency. But today, more than ever, we're becoming a spiritual emergency, so it has become more important to learn the spiritual concepts that Kabbalah teaches. So what is the word of Kabbalah? It's a sophisticated exploration of the order of devolution. Devolution is the opposite of evolution. What's the devolution? In the Kabbalistic concepts, before God created the world, there was nothing except for God. So you have an infinite space, an infinite being, an infinite existence, an infinite, I'm going to make up a word here, isness. Infinite isness. And now, somehow from this infinite isness, there's a new isness that's different than this original isness called the universe, creation, human beings. Well, how did that happen? How do you get from this isness that's infinite, that takes up all space, all time? So where is there room for my isness, for the universe isness? Where does it come from? And this is one of the things that the Kabbalists are trying to explain through these maps. We're going to start all the ways at the bottom. We're going to start from I exist and work ourselves up to learn what are the states of closeness to the infinite. So we're starting off from the finite in this course. Lesson 1, we're going to start off with the finite, and we're going to work our way up to greater degrees of abstraction and infinity. Okay. Now, now you might say, did it have to be this way? Did it have to be that there's this great devolution between the infinite and the finite? It didn't have to be this way. God, if he wanted, could have made infinite, and now there's finite. No explanations. Why? Because God can do the impossible. So something that's impossible, God can do. So God is infinite, and yet there's room for finite in the infinite. How does that work? It's not possible. That's no problem for God, because God could do the impossible. But God did not want that. The Kabbalists explain that God wanted a system, to create a system between his infinite and us, so that we can work our way up and get closer to God by working through the system. Not just that. You ever heard the expression from the Torah, God created man in his image? So here's what God did. There's infinite God. God then creates himself in an image, so to speak. In other words, he boxes himself in to appear and express himself in a very specific way. And then he creates us in that mirror image. And now, as we learn about ourselves, we start to understand things about how God relates to us. And as we understand things about God, we understand things about ourselves. Because he created us in a mirror image of his own image. The image means definition, his finiteness. That means when God expresses himself to us, he chose to express himself to us in a very specific system. And we're going to learn all about that system in the next 6 weeks. And then he also created our inner world, our soul, in the same exact system, to mirror that system. So as we learn about the Kabbalah of the universe, we're also learning about ourselves. And that's the right side of the map. The right side of the map is all about our inner worlds. On the left side is about the universe, about the spiritual realities. And on the right side is our inner world. And so every lesson, we're going to start off the first half, learning about the big picture, and about the second half, we're going to be learning in our own life. So let's begin with text 2. Text 2. Or let's begin with text 1, and then we'll work our way around to text 2. Who's on? You have text 2? On page 6. Okay.
The mortal mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Mortal is a mirror for the supernal reality. All that exists in both higher and lower realms is present in microcosmic form within the human. This is the deeper significance of the Torah statement that a human was created in the divine image. And this is why we say, from my flesh and vision God.
Okay. So from learning about ourselves, we can understand things about God. Now, that is a very dangerous statement because people tend to make God in their image. You know, what I care about, that's what God cares about. What makes sense to me, that's what makes sense to God. It's not really that way. But since we're created in a mirror image, it's possible as long as we're following the Kabbalistic tradition. The Kabbalists show us where the links are between our soul and God. So be careful. And that's why we're teaching Kabbalah, and Kabbalah is so important. But for many years, it was seen as very dangerous, because people can make their own conclusions that are not linked with Kabbalah. So it's very careful to have authentic tradition in Kabbalah. Okay, now the how of Kabbalah. The how of Kabbalah is this map. This map is called Seder Hishtalshelus. Seder Hishtalshelus, this is the first key term. Seder, we know from the Passover Seder. Seder means order. Hishtalshelus, it comes from the word shalshelet, a chain. Okay? So this map is a chain of how we get from infinite to finite. And we're starting off at the bottom of the chain, the finite. Okay? Now, anyone familiar with the picture that we have on the slide? Amelia Bedelia? Okay, anyone know this book? She's a character in a book where she's given instructions and she takes everything super literally. So she's told to turn. She's told to hang up the light bulbs, and she goes outside and hangs it on the clothing line. Like she takes things literally in the wrong way. So that's very important not to do with Kabbalah. I'll give you an example. In this lesson, I'm giving you a sneak peek. We're going to learn about 3 worlds. 3 worlds that exist before our physical world. What does it mean before when we're speaking about spiritual? What does it mean a world when we're speaking about spiritual? It is very important that we don't think before means before in time, and we don't think spiritual, a world means, oh, there's our physical reality, and then you have virtual reality, other virtual realities. It's very important to remember that these spiritual concepts represent very nuanced ideas. And that's what we're trying to do, this big task of explaining very abstract ideas, but giving very physical language to make it relatable and to make it useful so we can improve our lives. At the same time, we have to be careful not to assume that it's literal. When we say a world, we don't mean a physical world, okay? So we always have to be very careful. When we say God's infinite light, don't think light like coming out of a light bulb. Think about a spiritual kind of light. Now, the reason Kabbalists use imagery is because it's very helpful, and usually the imagery is very useful. There's something about light that is beneficial to the way light works versus saying the infinite waterfall. The reason why Kabbalists use light, there's something that's very relatable about how light works and how the infinite light works. But don't think that we're talking about an infinite light. That's a physical light. So very important to maintain our understanding. We're talking about spiritual abstract concepts and trying to make it relatable. And that's why Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, in text 2, he warns us, or text 3, he warns us, Amar HaKadosh Kadosh Hashem Rav Yisrael Baal Shem Tov Nishmas Eden, Asher Belimud Sifrei HaKabbalah, Yesh Lizaher Shelo Yidam Hadvarim Kipshut Zasad. The saintly Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov taught that when studying works of Kabbalah, we must be careful not to perceive the Kabbalistic ideas as literal physical concepts. Okay? So, let us begin our journey. Everyone ready? Now we're going to learn real Kabbalah. We're going to start off with a video. Okay, before we start the video, this is also a useful idea. Besides for the benefit, the last two benefits, which is when we study Kabbalah, the background information can help us make better choices, and we can affect and influence what happens above. And we'll see that today by the end of the lesson, a way that we can affect what happens in the spiritual realities. But there's also a general benefit to Jewish people, and that is a special mitzvah. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to know God. How many of us know God? He's infinite. How can we know him? Well, when you study Kabbalah, Kabbalah discusses God. In the written Torah, it's not so important to know God. It's important to do good, be a good Jew, do mitzvahs. That's always the most important thing. But there's also a mitzvah to know God and to love God. And it's very hard to love a being that you don't know anything about. So when you're studying Kabbalah, you're doing very important mitzvahs of knowing about God and learning, and that will hopefully help you to love him and respect God. Okay. I'm pausing this video because I want to tell you what this video is going to do and what we're going to do right after. This video is 5 minutes explaining you a core Kabbalistic teaching that we're going to unpack over the next 20 minutes. So pay attention, but don't worry if you didn't get it all, because we're going to unpack the video in the next 20 minutes after this video.
What is the Kabbalah? It's Judaism's mystical wisdom. It discusses souls, the deeper meaning of things, and the spiritual system of the heavens. Never heard of this heavenly system? That's okay. Why don't we do what Kabbalah does best? Offer a parable to explain something abstract. You decide to build a home. Your plan actually begins with an intuition of pleasure. Deep within your subconscious, you sense the enormous pleasure of dwelling in a home that truly suits you. That spark of pleasure that invades your brain's desire center. I want a home, you tell yourself. Immediately, your intellect grabs the wheel. You logically justify your desire and analyze the possibilities. Your emotions chime in. How do I feel about this location? Am I comfortable with high windows? You carefully rethink your plan, you discuss it with friends, and are finally ready for action. Sign, build, move. What's all that got to do with heaven? The Kabbalah reveals that when God decided to create the physical world, God first created an entire spiritual system that parallels the experience we've just described. In this first video, we'll take a quick look at the final 3 stages of this system. In each subsequent video, we will climb one level higher as we explore this supernal chain of command. The mystical work titled the Zohar discusses the existence of 3 spiritual worlds that precede our own. Their names are Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiya. These worlds are inhabited by angels and souls before they descend to earth, and those who have passed away and flourish in the afterlife. In Hebrew, the word beria means to create something from nothing at all. So in the spiritual world of beria, for the first time in the entire system, things exist that are aware of their own existence. They feel independent, outside of God. That's amazing, because nothing is independent of God. But in beria, God hides His presence to enable entities to emerge with a sense of self. Nevertheless, the angels and souls that inhabit beria feel tremendously close to God and are completely focused on God. Everything here is fragile, extremely close to losing its identity and being blissfully overwhelmed by proximity to God. So, God took it one step further and created the spiritual world of Yetzirah, which means to give shape to something. This is where the sense of independence from God truly begins to take shape. Here, God hides His presence to a far greater degree, which allows the spiritual inhabitants of Yetzirah to develop greater self-awareness. That said, God is still sensed in the spiritual place. And so, God made Asiya, which in Hebrew implies a complete and final product. From its perspective, the sense of independence from God is complete. Asiya has two linked layers. Its top layer consists of spiritual beings, and in its lower layer is our physical universe, the tangible, material world we know so well, where we struggle to relate to the divine force that continuously creates us. The good news? Even as we reside in the physical Asiya, our souls keep a connection with those higher worlds from which they emanate. The spiritual Asiya helps us peer beyond the physical. Yetzirah empowers us to suspend our self-focus long enough to sense God's presence. And beria helps us feel blissfully overwhelmed by God's presence, at least momentarily, such as in a moment of meditative prayer. So, we walk planet Earth, but at the same time, we can be firmly rooted in the bliss of spiritual loftiness.
Okay. Any questions? That's we're gonna unpack all of that, and everyone over here is gonna become a Kabbalistic master in all and everything we just saw. So let's start off with the beginning. Okay, the first thing is the understanding of Seder Hishtalshelus, this chain, this idea. Just like in our inner world, when we decide, you know what, I want to get married, or I want to buy a house, where did that sense come from? Like, what do you mean? I like being married. I like getting a house. No, it started much deeper. There's a part of yourself that feels deep pleasure in having a home that fits to you, or in finding your soulmate. And so from your pleasure goes desire. Okay, I have a pleasure. I'm lacking that pleasure right now. So I have a desire to go and get something that will fill this deep pleasure and drive that's within me. And then from there, you say, okay, what is it that will satisfy this pleasure? So you start to analytically process it and analyze. So okay, we need a house, we need this, we need that. What are the criteria of the house? And then we say, does this house feel good, right to me? Does it satisfy the ideas? And then we meet with experts and we consult with friends and we discuss. And finally, we do the deal. We buy the house, we build the house, or whatever it is, action. Okay? So there's a whole spiritual chain that happens within us, a whole process, a whole inner system that's working. Now it's pure light. Our soul is pure infinite light. And somehow that infinite light gets processed until it ends up with us, with our brain telling our muscles, move your hand and scribble in this exact way, which represents your signature, which means you bought the house. How did it get it from an infinite soul to signing in a specific way a signature. It went through a whole processing, stage through phase, stage through stage, until this infinite light expressed itself in a signature or in building a particular building. And the same thing is, the Kabbalists explain, is between infinite God and our finite, is this whole spiritual process. And the more we know about the spiritual process, the more we can gain ideas of how to be more productive and more aligned and spiritually aligned. And we can also make it changes. We can make internal changes within, which make make cosmic changes above. Because we're a small world, we're not just created in the image of God, we also affect the spiritual realms. So when we're spiritually aligned inwards, it also creates shifts in the cosmic spiritual realities. Now, we're in the blue part of our map. So you can look at our map, and that's what we're discussing today. These 3/4 worlds, okay? 3 spiritual realities and our physical reality. So let's start with the basics. We have a physical universe. How large is the universe? We don't really know, but it's stupendous, humongous. It's hard to even grapple with. And so often when we think about the amazingness of creation, we're thinking about how amazing this vast material creation and universe exists. But the Kabbalists say, don't stop there. There is 3 spiritual universes that are here as well. There are 3 deeper dimensions to this physical universe. When we are walking in this physical universe, whenever we yearn for more, that is because our soul is connecting to the Asiya, this spiritual reality of Asiya. When we yearn to get close to God, that is Yitzira. And when we feel completely sublimated and enraptured with godliness, we enter the spiritual reality of Beriah. And that could all happen while I'm standing in this physical universe. So when we call a world, we don't mean it's some distant place away. We just mean it's a distinct spiritual dimension. And these are 3 spiritual dimensions that exist in this physical universe. Just our physical doesn't ask any questions. The physical self, it just is, and has no problem with just existing. Our physical self has no problem just existing, but we also have a spiritual side. And our spiritual side is trying to push its way up to these rungs. Starts off with so now let's explore a little bit about these names, and then we're going to come back to what these names represent and the dimensions it relates. Give me a moment. Okay. So these terms of these 3 worlds, Beriah, Yitzira, Asiya, they come from somewhere. They come from Genesis. If you open up a Torah, a Bible, Chumash, you're going to look at Genesis story, and you're going to see that God uses 3 terms in the process of creation. And they're all connected to creation, but in the Hebrew, they're divided, they're nuanced into 3 separate terms. The first term we have is bara. Bara means created. The next is yatzar, which means fashioned or formed. And the third is asa, he made. Now, what is the difference between something that is created, something that is fashioned, and something that is made? So if you're not a Kabbalist, you say, it's really just 3 words for the same thing. There's no difference. Come the Kabbalists, and they say, wrong. There is deep meaning to these 3 things. Bara, created, means something from nothing. Something exists, there was nothing, and then there's something, that's bara. Yatzar is a step further. That something becomes defined, becomes formed, that's yatzar. Then it becomes functional, that's asa, it was made. So everything in the universe goes through these three phases. When God is creating the universe, he didn't just say, in other words, in the Torah it says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let there be trees, and there were trees. But in this speech, there was actually a process. There was a spiritual, how this speech turned into a tree. How did the spiritual energy turn into a tree? Well, it started off as a spiritual existence in Berea. That spiritual existence gained more form in Yetzirah. That spiritual existence became functional in the world of Asiya. And then it became materialistic. And that is the Kabbalistic model of creation. So, and everything that exists in this world follows that pattern. You'll see it all the time. So you have an embryo. Now, this is already after the embryo is already divided a little bit. But think about the first moment that you have life. That's an amazing thing. Life. Incredible. That's throw fireworks. Incredible. We have life. But the life is not formed into anything that can produce, that can create, that can. Then it goes through fetus. It starts development. It starts gaining form, but it's not fully functional until it reaches full physical maturity. You know, in the abortion debates, they were asking a Jewish mother, when is this child fully viable? The Jewish mother says, when he gets his medical degree, you know? So there's different phases of development. The same thing is in these spiritual realities. We have Berea, Yetzirah, and Asiya. These are these three worlds, these three spiritual worlds that exist in existence. And let's back up and remember something, okay? We have infinite space, infinite God. God is infinite. And just take a moment to really reflect what infinite means. You know, let's take a moment to think of a simple example. Imagine so hard to imagine infinity, but let's say I say, okay, look at this chair, this table. Look at a table. Everyone has a table or a piece of furniture around them. Okay, imagine this table was infinitely long. Okay, now imagine it was infinitely wide. Okay, now imagine it was infinitely tall and short and low. There's no room for anything else. There is no room for anything else. It's infinity. There's no room. There's no like, okay, after it gets this big, now there's room for something else. No, in infinity, there's no two infinities. There's only room for one because it's infinite, right? And that's a physical example. So now we're talking about an infinite God. So we exist within this infinity. So how come we feel so independent? We don't feel God's presence. Well, God will learn in later lessons why God wanted that. But for whatever it is, for our existence to work, we have to feel independent. And so these three phases, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya, also represent three levels of being aware of God's infinity. Okay? In Berea, spiritual beings that exist in the world of Berea, they feel so overwhelmed by God's presence that all that is allowed is that they're aware, I exist. That's the only information they know. They don't have any feelings. They don't have anything. Their whole awareness is, I exist, but my existence is so flimsy because God's existence is so much more powerful than my existence. So their whole experience is so overwhelmed by God's infinite light. Then God creates a level of concealment. And the word olam, a world, means concealment because it comes from the word helem. Olam and helem is a similar word, means concealment. The more God conceals himself, the more allowance there is for us to have our own personal identity. The more aware we are of his presence, the less space there is for us, because we're so overwhelmed by God's infinity. So God makes concealment after concealment of his infinite light that allows us to feel independent. So in the first stage, in Berea, we have very little independence. We feel overwhelmed by God's presence. In Yetzirah, we already have feelings. I feel so excited to know God. I feel in love with God. I feel in awe with God. In Asiya, the reality is, God, I know I have to take you into consideration because you made me, but I have my own wants, my own desires, my own life, and I'll think about you from time to time, especially in cases of emergency, right? Until we get to our physical world, where some of us aren't even aware that there's a creator God. So you could walk around this universe and deny God's existence. And so this special process occurred. And again, in later lessons, we're going to learn why God wanted this. So let's review the names. These three worlds, in short, are called Biyah. Can anyone figure out why these three words combined are called Biyah? Acronym. It's an acronym for Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So the first world is Bara, is the creation of something from nothing. The first existence that is in its perception outside of God. This is the world of Bria. Then you go to the next stage, Yatzar. This is formation, giving shape to a pre-existing entity. The pre-existing entity starts to develop and become defined. And finally, we have Asa, completing a task. It's functional. Complete independence and self-awareness emerges. Okay? Now, where do we exist in this? The answer is we're part physical and part spiritual. And our soul went through all these three processes. But some souls spend a little longer in certain dimensions. And some souls go very quickly through these dimensions. And so what happens is some people that live in this world, really, they see things from a higher perspective because their soul never really immersed itself in the lower world. And some of us, our soul went through the filters and went through the concealments, and so we see things from a lower perspective. So not every soul is the same, because some souls have greater attachment to higher realities than we do. So you can have 5 people in the same room, and they're each experiencing reality on a whole different level. One person is walking, and all he feels is himself. He's full of himself. He sees nothing beyond. Now, of course, he has a soul, but he's not in touch with his soul. And for him, he has to work a lot harder to get in touch with his soul. Other people, they didn't ground themselves when they were born. Their soul just went into this world, but it didn't get tainted by this world. It didn't pick up the ego of this world. It has a higher perspective. And so great tzaddikim, when we think of righteous people, not every rabbi is considered a tzaddik. And that's not a problem. In Judaism, what is a tzaddik? A tzaddik, a righteous man, a holy man, is a few people in every generation that they're in this world, but their soul is really, they're in touch with a much higher dimension, a much deeper dimension to themselves. And there's a special day in the Jewish calendar called Yom Kippur, which God grants us the ability to get in touch with the deepest parts of ourselves, like the tzaddik has 365 days a year. So that's why Yom Kippur, when we're going through all the prayers, we're saying the same things 5 times. What we're really doing is we're journeying into these deeper dimensions within ourselves to gain this higher consciousness, this higher divine awareness. And that's what's happening. Any questions before we move on? Okay, good. Okay, so that is what this map is showing. This is a map from the 1500s, but he's trying to work through different stages of ego and independence, the devolution of ego, how it came from godliness is everywhere to feeling that, oh, godliness is everywhere, but I exist, to I exist and I have opinions, to I exist and I'm the most important existence in the whole universe. How did that happen? So that's what they were trying to describe with these maps. So in order to have an independent identity, we need a world of separation. The more, if you feel attached to a higher reality, you're really part of that higher reality. You need separation in order to allow your identity and your ego to emerge, which is also represented with the absence of divine names. And we'll learn more about that in later lessons. Okay, so let's drive it home. Let's drive this home, and we're explaining Kabbalah, but we're soon going to make it very personal, okay? So you have a toddler. The toddler, he can walk, he can eat, he can do things. But you ask him opinions about how his life should be, and usually he doesn't have any opinions about the world. He doesn't have any opinions. He just eats, sleeps, he exists. He exists. That's his whole reality. He grows up, he becomes school age, and all of a sudden, he also has opinions. He has feelings. He has attitude. He has, I like it this way, I like it that way, I don't like. Now, a lot of it is influenced by his parents. What his parents like, that is most likely what he's going to like. You say, do you vote? Are you pro the president or anti the president? Ask a school-age child. Most likely, whatever his parents like, that's what he likes. Then you become a teenager, and it becomes exactly the opposite. Whatever my parents like, I don't like. You ever heard of teenage syndrome? That is, you're sitting in the living room, and you're eating your parents' food, and you're living in their house, and your car is, they pay the insurance and everything, and you say, Mom and Dad, you never do anything for me, right? You do nothing for me. Such an inflated sense of ego. But this is healthy and mature. As they gain independence, they go through this process. The more connected and bonded they are with their parents, the less personalization they have. As they grow up, they become more and more independent. What do we ultimately want? Our independent children. Do we want our children to remain dependent on us? No. The dream is that our children should independently choose to have the exact same values that we have, independently. But they should do exactly what we value and exactly how we choose. And that is God's ultimate dream too for us. He creates us complete independence and ego. And we could make a mess, a big mess. But God is hoping we'll achieve that. Okay. Okay, so this is a more than states of creation. It's more important to view these spiritual realms as states of mind. Okay, although they have realms, but in Asiya reality, God feels somewhat distant from us, and that's why we have to study, or else we don't. Is God real? Does he feel? There was once a Kabbalist walking through a town. This is a true story. He was walking through a town, and in this town, they were very suspicious of Kabbalists. So they were nervous. So he came into the town, and they asked him, what do you spend all your time? What do you spend your time thinking about? So we see you meditate a lot. What do you think about? He says, I spend a lot of time thinking about myself. I'll say, okay, not such a mystical guy. And then, as he's leaving town, he says, I just want you to understand what I meant. To me, God's existence is 100% real. Do I exist? How do I exist? That I have to spend a lot of time thinking about. How do I exactly exist then? Where does my ego come from? That's why I'm spending a lot of time thinking about myself. So in the Yetzirah reality is already sensing God's presence in our life. And in Bria reality is a state of being overwhelmed by his presence. Now, we can go through this at different phases in our life. There can be some phases in our life where we're living life in an Asir reality, where God feels somewhat distant to us. And then we could go into other phases in our life, and it's not static, it's not linear. We could go up, we could go down, up and down, and it's also within one day. Within one day, you can start off the day on one dimension, and then through work, through spiritual work or amazing things that happen to you in your life or other things that happen, it causes you to ascend into these spiritual realms up and down. And so it's very important. That's what the Kabbalists teach us. You're in this world, but there's so much more to this world. And by knowing about these worlds, you can actually gain control to actually say, actually, I want to get into that state of being. Instead of just reacting and getting like some foreign stimuli came into my life and then I was in this state of reality, we can actually control and put ourselves into a state of reality that we want to be. That takes us to identifying this within ourselves. So let's do a puzzle. Everyone, take out a pen or your phone and type this in a memo. 2 + 2 = 5. I love moldy tofu. Okay. Everyone did it? Okay. Now I want you to turn to the person next to you. You can put in the chat as well. Say the same exact thing. 2 + 2 = 5. I love moldy tofu. Now I want you to think 2 + 2 = 5. And I love moldy tofu. Can you think it? Yep. Clearly, if you said it, you thought it, right? Okay. Now, I want you to understand that 2 + 2 = 5. Can you understand that? Can you understand that 2 + 2 = 5? And can you feel I love moldy tofu? Yeah. What?
That's why we're taught. That's what we believe. We don't, I don't think I believe.
Oh. Okay, think of something that you dislike and feel that you really love it. Easy? Easy to do? 2 + 2 = 5. You can understand it? You can explain it? You can explain it. How is 2 + 2 = 5? What are we trying to show here? We're trying to show that within us, we have thoughts, speech, and action. That's think, say, and do. Think, say, and do is external to us, is external to our soul. There's our soul, and there's our soul's vehicles of expression. These are called in Hebrew levushim. A levush means a garment. Now let's say you dress up in a beautiful tuxedo or a ballroom dress and gown. Makes you feel a certain way. But then you change it and you put on your pajamas or athletic wear or some other clothing. You feel different, right? But you can always change it. You can always change it. Take off one, put on the other. You can change. They're not who you are. They express your personality, but they're not who you are at your core. The same thing is our thoughts, speech, and action have different degrees of distance from us. Like these three spiritual worlds that we learned about, Bria, Asiya, Yitzira, and Asiya, that are spiritually separate from God. The more separate, the more differentiated they are. That's also works in our thoughts, speech, and action. Our thoughts are more connected to our personality versus our speech versus our action. Our action is the least. The least. You build something and then you walk away. How much of your personality is seen in the table that you built? You have to have a real expert who can look into the table and say, oh, that reflects this kind of personality or that. But for most of us, you look at a table, you don't see the person's personality, his feelings, his understanding, his perspective on the world. You don't really see it in the table. You see it a little more in his speech. But he could be saying things that are totally not aligned with what's going on in his world. He can say, I love moldy tofu, even though in his heart, he hates moldy tofu. But a little bit more, usually in speech, you can find a little bit of information about a person's personality and his inner world and his thoughts. If we could look at somebody else's thoughts, wow, it's scary. Thank God we don't. But even in our thoughts, we can think things that are not true to what's happening in our inner reality. This tool, this understanding, this paradigm of recognizing that our thoughts, speech, and action are separate from our soul, separate from our personality. They are our levushim, our garments. It's so instructive. It's so powerful. It's a very powerful tool because we could change them. We could change them. Just like you could change your outfit, your uniform, you could change your thoughts, speech, and action. So let's just process this a little more. And this is, we're on the right side of the map. We're going through this bottom part, the blue, thoughts, speech, and action. First of all, they can operate in ways that contradict your soul. I can say 2 + 2 is 5. Can the soul say that? No, because the soul cannot understand that 2 + 2 is 5, because it's not logical, at least in the logic part of the soul. But can you say it? You can do something to contradict your soul. Can you behave in ways that contradict your soul? Absolutely. All the time we do that. They can easily be changed. Our thoughts, speech, and action can easily be changed. And they are referred to as levushim, as garments of the soul. They have their own identity. Okay? They have their own identity. Now, this is a strange concept. What we mean is when you build a table, the table has a life of its own. When you write a document, the document has a life on its own. People can read the document that you wrote, which is your speech, your communication, and have a whole different interpretation than what you really meant and what you really felt and really understood inside when you wrote it. And even your thoughts, if people were able to peer into your thoughts, it's a little more different, but it has its own identity. That's not the same as your emotions and your intellect. Emotions and intellect are wrapped up in your soul. It cannot be separated. Okay? And these three things of thought, speech, and action correspond to these 3 spiritual realms, 3 spiritual dimensions of Biyah, of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. In thoughts, our thoughts sense the soul's feelings more forcefully. So when you have a powerful feeling in your soul, it's going to express itself the most in your thoughts. Sometimes you try to explain it to other people, it's much more difficult. Our thoughts are constantly churning within us. You cannot turn off your thoughts. However, let's take a look at speech. Oh, and our thoughts remains unknowable to others. So what does this tell us about our thoughts? Our thoughts are the realm that's closest to our soul. It's the most enmeshed in our personality, but it is not our personality. It's right outside our personality. But our thoughts are the most enmeshed in our personality, but they are not our personality. Corresponds to Bria, the least ego. Speech. Speech doesn't run constantly. And it's observable outward expressions. And no separation between the words and the speaker. Words only exist as long as I'm speaking. Whenever I'm speaking, I'm here. However, and speech is also not tangible. So it also reflects more of my soul. This corresponds to Yetzirah. Now we get to the world of action. It exists outside of us. And it's physical and tangible. Okay? So you see how the spiritual cosmos reflects our spiritual inner worlds? It's aligned 3 to 3. Okay? Any questions before we move on? Yeah.
What is closest to our soul?
From these 3 worlds, from these 3 options, thought is the closest. The place where you'll find your soul's expression the most is in your thoughts. Then you try to articulate it to others, and already things get lost in translation. It's your speech. And then when you try to express it in doing something, yeah. But it's very, sometimes we do something physical, but it also has spiritual components as well. So let's say if you're giving someone a hug, so there's a physical part of your hug, but there's also the speech part of your hug. And there's also what you're thinking about, the intention while you're giving the hug. So when you're giving a hug, you're doing all 3 things at once. You're communicating, you're thinking of the love that you have for the person, and you're doing. So it's not like these are 3 things happening at separate times. They can be happening at the exact same time, but they represent different levels of your personality, your soul expressing itself. Genya, go ahead. I can't hear you though, so you have to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I've always like understood that the physical world is all about asiya. It's all about the action more than the thoughts and the speech.
Mm-hmm.
So is that why asiya is right above the physical, like planet?
Well, the physical planet is also Asiya. So in Asiya, there's two
Oh,
dimensions. There's a
see.
spiritual and a physical dimension to us. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go into the first puzzle, the first tool that this is so useful to what people are going through today. Okay? Anyone felt overwhelmed by the news recently? And you feel like it's just bombarding you the whole day and you have no control and you're feeling anxious and worried and frightened and angry. Happens all the time. This first concept that we learned about today, levushim, that's our garments of our soul, have its independent identity from ourselves. It's not one with us. It's independent. That means we can control it. Okay? If we can say 2 + 2 is 5, and we can think 2 + 2 is 5, that means that when I'm feeling angry, I could turn off my thinking. I don't have to think angry. Just because I feel angry doesn't mean I have to think angry. And when I stop thinking angry, then the feeling runs out of oxygen and evaporates. And then it might come up again. So here's the tool I want you to use over the next week. Take a moment to think about something beautiful. That could be a person, someone who you love and trust, or admire and care about, or a place, a vacation, a space where you really want to be and belong. And take a moment to think about it and to meditate on it and to get excited about that feeling. After you do that, and this is something you can do again when you get home, or for those that are home, you could do it later after the class. Take that feeling and keep it in your pocket. Put it in your pocket. And then whenever you are feeling anxious and worried and afraid, and it is and it's happening at a time that you don't have the time to be anxious and worried. In other words, there is an appropriate time to be anxious and worried, but it doesn't have to be your whole day. It can be 10 minutes in the day you dedicate to feeling your feelings, but it doesn't have to take up all 24 hours of your day. So you say, you know what? I'm driving and I'm feeling anxious. Let me switch my thoughts to that thought I have in my pocket, that good thought, that peaceful thought of that person I love, I trust, or that place I want to be, or that vacation I'm going on, or this project I'm working on. And you can do that. You're really in control of your life. You're really in control of your thoughts, speech, and action. Your personality, not so much. But your thoughts, speech, and action, you are in complete control as long as you have a plan and as long as you know about it. If you don't know that you're in control, you might feel out of control. But you really are in control at all times. The impulse will come up. That's not in your control. Your soul trying to express its rage, that will happen. That's not in your control. But then to think, to choose the thoughts you'll think about, that you can do. And so divert it to what you're feeling. So let's say you're feeling really angry at someone and you want to curse at them. You don't have to. You're in control. So remember that exercise we did in the beginning of the lesson? Remember you thought about something that's really difficult, right? Something you want to work on? So just remember, just because you feel that way doesn't mean you have to do that way. Okay? This is the easy trick. Now, it's a Band-Aid. It is a Band-Aid. Because sometimes you say, well, can anyone want to offer an example of something a thing they want to work on? The thing they chose? Anyone want to offer? You don't have to if you're embarrassed. But I think we could all be honest. We all have things to work with. Laziness, right? Let's say I feel I'm not in the mood. I don't feel in the mood. I'm not in the mood. Okay, my thoughts are feeling I'm not in the mood. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And then what do? We switch and we say, I'm going to think about something positive right now, and I'm going to do it anyways. I'm not going to allow these thoughts of how much I don't want to do it pervade my minute right now. I'm going to think of something positive, and I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to make the phone call I don't want to do. I'm going to do the thing. I'll just do it. So we shut off the part of our brain that's telling us, don't do it, procrastinate, this, that. And we just say, I'm going to do it. So I'm not in the mood of cleaning up right now. Put on the happy thoughts, listen to some music, and just do it. Now, it's a short-term solution because at the end of the day, if we have to do this every day, it gets exhausting. But it's powerful. It's a powerful tool that we should use. It shouldn't be our long-term tool. The better way is to shift our personalities, which is a lot harder work to do, but it's something in next lesson we'll learn techniques how to do that too. But we're in control. Even if my natural tendency leads towards arrogance, I can still act modestly. Even if my character is more cynical, I can still speak favorably of others. And even if my inclinations is to be anxious, I can still think calming thoughts. Yes.
I'm not sure if I understand. Did you say that the thought, speech, and action is different than the personality?
That's right.
Does that make up?
No, your perspective of the universe and your feelings about the universe and the things around you and yourself, that makes up your personality. But what you're thinking about and what you're feeling, what you're speaking about and what you're doing doesn't have to be an expression of your personality. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. You can think things that you don't believe in. That's just how it works. Okay, another benefit here. Another thing to understand. We are all considered mankind. Mankind in Hebrew is called Adam. Okay, that's the Hebrew letters that make up Adam. What makes Adam different than every other creature that exists in the universe? What makes man different? What makes humanity different? Is this ability to control our thoughts, speech, and action. No other creature has ability to control their thoughts, speech, and action. If they're feeling, that's what they're speaking. If they're thinking, if they're understanding, by all other creatures that exist, they cannot control, and therefore they cannot lie. Human beings can lie, because we can control our thoughts, speech, and action, so we could say something that we don't feel. We can do that, right? Because we're in control. But the same way we're in control in the negative, we're also in control in the positive. We're feeling angry. We don't have to behave angrily just because we feel that way. Now, we do have Dr. Joe Verstanig is our resident mental health professional. This course is accredited. And so not everything I'm saying is necessarily good mental health advice. If you want any good advice on whether you should suppress your emotions to such a degree, Joe will be here after class and you can ask him all your questions. He's online.
Joe?
What? You're on mute.
I'm unmuted. Anything, yeah, just ask away. I was
Yeah.
gonna make a comment as long as you said my name. I'm not sure that we can totally control our thoughts. We can control the expression of our thoughts, but thoughts have a way of coming back.
Oh, so I didn't mention that your soul will always try to find a way to express itself in the thought. And so that initial thought, compulsive thought, is not in your control. But once you become aware that you're thinking about this thought, that's when you could do the switch. So you're right. The initial thought is not in your control. But when you become aware, that's when you can use this tool to steer your thoughts into something else. You cannot turn off your thoughts. That's like, don't think about a pink elephant for 1 minute. Most likely, most of the minute will be spent thinking about pink elephants. So don't say, I'm not going to think this thought. I'm not going to feel anxious right now. I'm not. I told myself I'm not going to feel anxious. That's not going to work. You have to replace it with a positive thought. You have to have something in your back pocket to pull out.
An emotion.
Anger is an emotion. But
You can control, you get angry. So
you're feeling angry. And then you're thinking about how angry you are at this person. And then you become aware, I'm right now feeling angry at this person. Let me redirect this thought because I don't want to actually be thinking angry thoughts about this person right now. Or I don't want to do something. I don't want to punch the guy right now. So how can I?
what if you have anger towards a person? It's continuous, it's on a daily basis. It's something you cause to.
So is the question, are you allowed to be angry at him? You might be allowed to. What's
No. I'm just, in other words, how would you stop that? Or do you need other tools besides those described?
This tool is only about managing if you don't want to react right now. That's what this tool is for. You don't want to react. You want to be in control of your reaction. You don't want to just, I'm feeling angry, so therefore let me act angrily. Let me say something smart. You want to be able to control it. So this Kabbalistic tool is letting you know that you can control it. It is doable. If you divert your attention elsewhere, it's in your ability because it's not your personality. You're not saying, I don't feel that way. That's not what you're asking of yourself. To demand that I don't feel the way I feel, that's an impossible task. You feel angry. So how are you going to tell yourself, I don't feel angry? You do feel angry. You're saying, I feel angry, doesn't mean I have to speak it, say angry. Doesn't mean I have to, swoon and bathe in the thoughts of my anger. I could direct my thoughts elsewhere. What? Yeah. Yeah. Now, sometimes it's okay. There's no sin here to be angry. We're not saying everything is context related. If you know there's a reason you shouldn't be doing what you feel that you have to do, we're just letting you know you don't have to do it. You don't have to, you're in control. And that's these 3 Hebrew letters. Adam is the first one is Alefcha, which means your thoughts. Dalet stands for Dibur, which means your speech. Mem in Adam in humanity means Maise, the world of action. This tells us that humans have the gift that we can control our thoughts, speech, and action. We can't control a lot about what happens in the universe. We cannot control a lot about what happens in our inner world, but we can control our thoughts, our speech, and our action. Another thing is the importance of being completely aligned in these 3 things: thought, speech, and action. Some people, you should see how they plan their road trips. They are reading reviews and reading articles and strategizing and planning top 10 places to go and what to pack and how to think. And then their partner is exactly the opposite. Oh, well, jump in the car. Well, what do you mean? How do you know there's gas stations on the way? Don't worry, we'll figure it out. You're right. You can relate to these 2 kinds of personalities. Well, and some people, they just talk about it. They're not thinking and they're not doing. They're just talking about it. So I'm going to go on to vacation, and they process everything through communication. And that represents probably where your soul level is. Your soul might be more connected to the dimension of Bria, of thought. Your soul might be more connected to Yetzirah, speech, or your soul might be more connected to Asiya, action. But the problem is, really, you need all three. And so those of us that are into the planning and strategizing, and that stops us from doing. It stops us from doing because we're so like, I don't think I have everything mapped out yet. I don't know if I have everything figured out. And then we just don't do it. And some of us, we're compulsive. We're just doing. And sometimes we're like, did you think about, was it the right thing to do? Is it the smart approach? So where you are, try to go the other extreme. If you're someone that's an action oriented, you should start seeing maybe you could plan things a little better. If you're someone, and also communicate and strategize with other people. Some people struggle with the communication part, sharing what they're feeling with other people. So that's another thing to remember. We need all three. Some people, there's a place for each one. Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it's not, sometimes you cannot wait till you make a plan, right? Sometimes you just have to do, right? And sometimes you make a plan, but then there's just no way to implement it.
You plan and God decide.
Exactly. Men plan. In Yiddish, it's men tracht und Gott lacht. We think and God laughs. God has his own plan. That's the same expression. Yeah. So we think, strategize, plan, consult with friends, experts, and mentors, and implement the decision into reality. We need all three. Okay? Thinking must be translated into action, and we must ensure that our actions are preceded by proper consideration and consultation. So imagine you just show up and you light the candles. Shabbat. You want to light candles for Shabbat. But you didn't take a time to meditate on what am I trying to do here? So are you going to have the full benefit of the candle lighting if you didn't take a moment to reflect and to think about the energy that I'm creating in this home? You won't have the full benefits. You'll have some benefit, the mitzvah of lighting candles. But you won't have the full benefit if you didn't take a moment to stop and think. Right? What happens if you spent the whole time thinking about the great joy of spirituality, but you didn't light the candles? You're also missing it. You need all three. Now, the important thing is the action. That's true, the physical world, but you need all three. And in our relationship with God, we have all three different types of mitzvahs. We have mitzvahs that are connected primarily to action, like giving charity, building your sukkah, shaking the lulav. These are action-oriented things. But then we have mitzvahs that are connected primarily to thought and speech, and that's like studying Torah and prayers and saying nice things to someone else and not spreading gossip. And many mitzvahs involve all three, right? So let's say, think of a mitzvah. Someone call out their favorite mitzvah. Is it eating matzah? Anyone have that as their favorite mitzvah? No. Okay. No one has. Okay. So let's say you love shaking the lulav and etrog. Who enjoys shaking the lulav and etrog? I like it. I think it's a beautiful thing. Kenya loves it. Joe, Rachel, yeah, beautiful. Okay. So we have the action of shaking the lulav. Then we have the recitation of the blessing related to the mitzvah. We make a blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem. And we have the intention that's involved in the particular mitzvah, the intention that we have. So now all parts of our levushim, of our garments of our soul, get to express our soul when we do the mitzvah. So that's a beautiful thing. Now, there's a handout I'm going to hand out to all of you. And if you can pass it around, let me take one. Okay, so this handout, I'm going to leave it in the chat after class, so you can print it out for those that are at home. But what is this handout? So this is the way we start off our day, is we go through the three worlds, the three spiritual dimensions we go through at the beginning of each day. Okay? First, upon awakening, the following prayer is said to acknowledge God's presence and to give thanks for the gift of life anew each day. When saying Moda'ani, the Chabad custom is to place one hand against the other and to slightly lower the head. Okay, so that's like this. This is the Chabad custom. You're in bed. While you're in bed, you wake up the first morning. The first moment you wake up in the morning, is it to check the news? No. If you check the news, what will happen is, our instinct is to check the news. What will happen? All of a sudden, our life gets flooded. And now we're not in control. The world is in control of us. But how do we gain control? So we do this three-step process, these three worlds. The first is we meditate and we say, we come awake, I'm awake. That's step one, become aware. Oh, I'm awake. And I want to thank God that I'm alive. Okay? And now you do that every morning. Beautiful. And then you say the Moda'ani. That's this prayer over here. Moda'ani is a prayer that we say, Moda'ani lefanecha melechai v'kayam. I thank God, you living and eternal God, for you have graciously restored my soul within me. Your faithfulness is great. This is a blessing that the sages made. It doesn't have God's name in here because you're not allowed to say God's name if your hands are dirty or things are dirty. When you sleep, you're not really in control. So who knows what you touched and what this, what that. So you say this prayer to show thanks, to say thanks to God. But what's the next step? The next step is we bring our service into action. We say, God, I love you, but how do I express it in action? So then we get out of bed, we go to our kitchen sink, or we have a wash basin next to our bed, and we wash our hands ritually 3 times on each hand. And that's how we align. Our thoughts are directed to our mission, our speech is connected to thankfulness to God, and our action is directed towards Hashem. So that's a great way to start off your day every day with thoughts, speech, and action. For this last thing, it's 8:35, so the class is officially over. I'm going to stay here for questions, but I want to do something unique. You have a unique opportunity. Many ancient Hasidic songs don't have any words. They're called a nigun. And the reason they don't have any words is because sometimes you learn something and then you have to personalize it. You have to actually process it because you heard, and now you have to process it. And so the nigun was a way to either process information or just process within yourself or express yourself. So I'm going to give a moment for questions, but if you have a long question, I ask that you save it for after we play the nigun. And for those that don't have time to stay for the nigun, that's fine as well.
What's
The prayer at the bottom is a blessing we say before we wash our hands. After we wash our hands. After you wash our hands. After you wash your hands. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Well, you plan on going back to sleep? What?
Yeah.
So then you don't. This is when you wake up ready to start your day. Okay. So this is the three stages here. You're contemplating God's relevance to our life. Recite the Moda'ani, verbalize gratitude to the gift of another day, and we wash our hands as the priest did when preparing to serve in the Holy Temple. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay. Oops, sorry about that.
That could be a DJ.
You know
Okay, we're gonna end it there. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah. Like, why does that representative, they use that instead of something else?
A niggin is a wordless melody. That means you don't put any words to it, and that's either to express the deepest parts of your soul or to put you in a state to be able to think and meditate and contemplate on these spiritual things. And when you put words, it limits. Every melody is different. I chose a random one. Yeah. Yes, each niggin represents this one. So this niggin is called the cry of the soul. So that's the language. It represents the soul's cry and yearning to express itself and get close to God. And then it reminding itself that I'm here on a mission. So even if I'm feeling, burnt out, it doesn't come with subtitles. Like in books, there's a book of niggins. It's called a book called the Sefer Hanigunim, the Book of Niggins, that explains the meaning of certain of the melodies. Very good. Okay. Thank you. Oh, my pleasure. I enjoy. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I sent an email to everyone. No, I didn't have your email. But you knew to come. You remember to come.
Yeah.
So you don't need the email.
Yes, actually, my brother gets it. So here.
Oh, you guys, very good. Very good. Okay. See the chat. Thank you so much. Let me upload the file here. For those that want the handout, I'm uploading the file to the chat of the Moda Ani file. Sending it in the chat.
Shalom, shalom.
Okay. Very good.
See you shop, right?
Or Macy.
Whatever.
Yeah. It was a good class. You enjoyed? You understood?
No.
No, it's overwhelming. Only one class. Yeah, one class. And the music is.
No.
Thank you.